Topic 9, Civil Rights and Reform in the 1960s. We're going to start with sections 9.1 to 9.3. We've got Jackie Robinson here, signed to the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. Big deal with Jackie Robinson is he breaks the color barrier of Major League Baseball and he integrates the sport. So he kind of paves the way for a lot of African Americans to come, not only in baseball, but also in other walks of life as well. So it's kind of a start here just after World War II with good old Jackie Robinson. Number 42, historically remembered in Major League Baseball day. Then you've got Emmett Till here. His murder is gonna be kind of the spark for the civil rights movement in a lot of different ways. Because it draws a lot of national attention to what a lot of black people are going through. He is accused of wolf whistling, cat calling at a white woman at a store he was visiting. He's from the North, relatively speaking, visiting family in Mississippi in the South. Allegedly does that, is kidnapped and killed by the woman's husband and his brother or half-brother. They end up going pretty much scot-free and innocent because the jury, even though there's damning evidence against them and they admit to the kidnapping, the jury is loaded with people that sympathize with them, white people that are probably racist themselves. So Emmett Till's murder does not get pinned on them properly as it should legally, although people kind of know what happened. His mother does an open casket funeral, which is very unusual at the time. His beaten, bloody, just disfigured face. She wants people to see what was done to him, and this kind of sparks a lot of civil rights outrage. Which kind of leads us into some of these things right here. You got de jure segregation, which is by law, de facto, by custom, kind of by, it's how it's always been kind of thing. You got the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. They're going to do a lot of fighting for civil rights in the courts. Thurgood Marshall is going to be eventually a Supreme Court justice, but he's going to be a major lawyer and player in this. He's going to be arguing in Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, which stems from Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson, remember, late 1800s, sets the precedent of separate but equal, so long as the accommodations, such as the school, all the desks and the conditions of the classrooms and everything that they have, so long as it's all equal, it is okay to segregate. Brown v. Board overturns that when young Linda Brown wants to go to school. She lives very close to a white school, but she is forced to go to a black school on the other side of town, essentially. Ends up going to court, ends up working its way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says they rule unanimously, very unusual in the sense that it's everybody's on board with this. And they say, hey, this is wrong just by segregating and separating. It is not equal. They use the phrase inherently unequal, so kind of by nature. Brown v. Board of Education. So ultimately it outlines that segregation is illegal, that things should be progressing towards integration. Is it going to be easy? No, there's going to be a lot of resistance to it, especially in the South, but it is kind of now going to be the law of the land. It is going to be pushing that way. It is also a direct cause of the Little Rock Nine situation with Governor Orville Faubus, Little Rock, Arkansas. 9 black students are supposed to go to Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. They're supposed to integrate. The governor sends in the National Guard of Arkansas and prohibits that. They also face a lot of criticism, threats, screaming, yelling, etc. As they try and go in with all the racial connotations you guys can think of. Governor Faubus sends in the National Guard. President Eisenhower at the time, he says, no, this is not how it's happening. He authorizes the federal military, the U.S. paratroopers, 101st Airborne Division, to go in and basically escort the Little Rock Nine into school, which they do. Other things popping up here. You got Rosa Parks, who refuses to give up her bus seat in Alabama. She's supposed to, by custom kind of thing, that this de facto segregation. If a white person wants to sit in her seat, especially if it's towards the front of the bus, she's supposed to get up, give them their seat, move towards the back. If nobody's able to sit down, white people are supposed to sit first, and then black people will stand. This kind of leads to Martin Luther King Jr., the Montgomery bus boycotts, in which when she goes to her court case, there is they organize and say, hey, let's boycott, not buy tickets, let's not ride on the buses. Lasts for just over a year, and eventually they kind of cave to the pressure because they're losing a lot of money. It's an economic win. Martin Luther King Jr. also involved in the SCLC. They're going to primarily promote nonviolent methods of protest and resistance and fighting for civil rights. Sit-ins, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, they're going to organize this. They go, and this happens in multiple places, but in particular, segregated lunch counter, and they just sit there. They refuse to leave. The movement kind of builds, and they gain some momentum, and eventually it's successful towards promoting business integration and restaurant integration. In particular, this is because it's an economic burden and strain on the businesses, so eventually they cave in, kind of similar to the Montgomery bus boycott. CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, the NAACP, the SCLC, SNCC, they all kind of have different methods. You can see there on the screen how they're generally going to be nonviolent. Nonviolent protests for CORE, go out, demonstrate, here's my signs, etc. NAACP, getting involved in the courts. SCLC, nonviolent direct means like a sit-in, stuff of that nature. Different methods, same goals, trying to end segregation, trying to promote civil rights and equality. Freedom rides are organized by CORE in 1961 in particular. Blacks and whites, they board buses from the north and head south. They get into Alabama in particular, and there's a lot of violence, fire bombings, beatings, etc. But they're trying to promote awareness. They're trying to end segregation, etc. And they're trying to show that, like, look, you can beat us, you can, harm us. We're not going to give in. We're not going to back down. President Kennedy does kind of get involved in that he desegregates interstate commerce, so travel and trade between the states. Of course, though, kind of like after Brown v. Board, this is going to be met with resistance because a lot of people are still holding racist values in the South, aren't really open to this change. Public institutions, please note James Meredith there, an all-white school in Mississippi, the University of Mississippi. He wins a federal court case to attend, graduates in 1963. So he's the first black person to attend a major institution in the South, the University of Mississippi specifically. Medgar Evers, a guy who helps him out, is assassinated for helping him out, so it is kind of deadly to be associated with civil rights movements here in one way or another. Alabama is another example. Governor George Wallace, you can see the quote there, segregation now, tomorrow, and forever. He is totally against integration, as many people were in the South. So it goes from the lowest of the low, like the Emmett Till situation, all the way up to the governors of states. So integration is going to face a lot of struggles here. The Birmingham, Alabama situation, the Birmingham movement, if you want to call it, the goal is to upset Commissioner of Public Safety, Eugene, a.k.a. Bull Connor. They want to fill the city's jails. They want to boycott. They want to get him mad. Why? Because they want people to be able to see what they're going through just while they're trying to, be peacefully resisting. People see on TV the fire hoses used, the police dogs attacking. So they're trying to push for integration of civil rights and voting rights here. And it kind of works to some degree because people see that they're just protesting quietly, casually, not causing any real trouble. And then they're more or less assaulted with the fire hose police dogs. So it's a really bad look for the police force and the states down there in particular. March on Washington. Martin Luther King is going to lead the march to Washington Memorial, 250,000+ people, showing a sign of strength, unity, etc. This is where he gives his famous I Have a Dream speech at the Lincoln Memorial. And then, of course, you got actual major violence here, bomb exploding in a church in Birmingham. This is not the only instance, but it's one major example of violence that black people are having to endure. The government's going to get involved here federally. Civil Rights Act of 64 bans basically any segregation in public places or discrimination for any basis in the workforce. President Johnson's the one who signs that, so it's a pretty big, massive piece of legislation. 24th Amendment also outlaws poll taxes in which you would have to pay to vote. Those would be targeted towards poor black people in particular. Literacy tests, you can take those as well. We did some of those in class. You can see here, for instance, some of the answers that we talked about in these here. They're very, very, very difficult, if not impossible. This one in particular that is up on the screen right now is pretty rough. Just very designed to be failed by people, designed to be nearly impossible. And this is going to limit black people from voting because if they can't pass it, then they can't vote, which is going to limit their power. Freedom Summer takes place in 1964. The SNCC organized a bunch of voters to go down to Mississippi in particular, trying to organize black voters and get them registered to vote. You do see some violence come out of this, though. Andrew Goodman, James Earl Chaney, and Michael Schwerner, they are all three murdered. Ends up being that they were just, for doing their job with SNCC, they were murdered, point blank shot, bodies found several days later. So that's Freedom Summer trying to get people to vote in Mississippi, black people specifically. Selma to Montgomery, this is kind of a response to the lack of voting rights and discrimination in general. Marching, 3 attempts to march Bloody Sunday. The marchers are attacked as they try to cross the bridge out of Selma heading towards Montgomery. Marchers return to church. There's a couple days later, there's a white minister from Boston killed, and eventually the National Guard, under federal control, not state control, because if it was under state control, guys like Governor Wallace and Faubus that we talked about probably wouldn't allow this. You get these 25,000 or so people that go to Montgomery, and they succeed in kind of making their voice heard for voting rights. Voting Rights Act of 65 bans the literacy test, so that's a big win. And maybe you could argue more important in a sense that it gives the federal government the oversight into areas like states like Alabama that are known for not giving African Americans their rights to vote. So this allows the federal government to step in if need be and bans literacy tests. Riots in the cities, racial riots. The Kerner Commission is brought about by President Johnson to determine why these happen. They figure out that it's basically just people are tired of the long-term racial discrimination. That's the big reason, especially with poor inner cities. So they decide, hey, we should send some money there. Well, the government says, yeah, I see what you're saying, Kerner Commission, but no, we're going to actually send the money to Vietnam instead. Malcolm X goes a little bit more militant, a little bit more aggressive. He's more about, he converts to Nation of Islam. He becomes a Muslim in prison. He believes more in self-defense, not maybe going out and harming white people, but if you're going to be attacked, you should be able to fight back. And potentially black nationalism, kind of creating a black community within America that is to some degree separate, you could argue, from white people in general. This is kind of contradictory a little bit, or, inflammatory, because it's arguably promoting segregation to some degree as opposed to integration. He does leave the Nation of Islam, goes to Mecca, and then he kind of mellows out, and he's like, yeah, okay, Dr. King, I see what you're saying about the nonviolence thing. Does get assassinated by members of the Nation of Islam, but he's really just trying to push for civil rights, just like Martin Luther King Jr., just in a different way. You get the Black Power movement. Stokely Carmichael coins it. He kind of radicalizes the SNCC and kind of moves them away towards from nonviolence towards violence. This is kind of just a sentiment of Black Power. We are powerful. We can do our own thing. We can stand up for ourselves. We can be successful. The Black Panthers kind of take this to heart, formed in '66 by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. Newton's the big one to remember there. They more or less just want to monitor police abuse and make sure that people, black people, that if they want to fight back, they can. One of the things they're really well known for, and they do a really good job with, is they do create a bunch of anti-poverty programs, free breakfast programs for poor black children. In short, they try and create the economic and otherwise situations that black people can thrive in. Here you see some demonstrations of Black Power by Tommy Smith and John Carlos in the '68 Olympics. This is a big world stage which this is happening, so that's going to be kind of a big deal that everyone's getting to see it. Martin Luther King Jr. is going to be assassinated eventually in '68 by James Earl Ray. Definitely holding some racist views was he. So King is standing there. You can see in the picture on the left. He's standing there on his balcony in his hotel, and Ray shoots him. He's going to become a martyr for the cause and kind of push civil rights forward a little bit. Through his death, it does some good. Obviously, it would have been better if he'd lived, but it does help promote civil rights furthermore and show the extremes which anti-integration people are going to go. Moving forward, you've got President Johnson here talking about affirmative action, essentially here, establishing these hiring educational guidelines to try and promote the concept that people like African Americans need an extra step up. You get arguably preferential treatment in hiring in other situations, maybe admits to a university. His basic argument is that you need to help these people more than white people because of their past and their history, and you can't just sit there and say, okay, go be equal, because it's not going to work ultimately because of their history. Busing students across districts to integration. Yes or no questions. Civil rights movement successful? To some degree. Do African Americans still face discrimination today? Yeah, definitely some. And should they be given preferential treatment, aka affirmative action, for college and jobs and other things? That's more of a personal question. So there it is, guys. 9-1 to 9-3. Here's several civil rights organizations you guys can check out if you're curious, and here's kind of a summary of them. If you have questions, let me know.